Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot, Kid, the podcast on the Nerd Party Network that looks at the technical and inspirational and artistic side of Star Wars and its creators. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week we have a special treat for you. We are going to be continuing our chapter-by-chapter analysis of Alan Dean Foster's 1978 classic, Splinter of the Mind's Eye. But before that, we are going to be taking a look at the art, the aesthetic of the Star Wars films. In specific, this week, we're looking at the original trilogy, and we have set a challenge for ourselves that we are to pick a shot from each film that we think speaks to the aesthetic of Star Wars. What you would show to somebody to say to them, this is what you can expect visually from these films. So before we get into that, remember, of course, we're on thenerdparty.com. You can make contact with the show at thenerdparty.com/contact. You can reach out to us on Facebook at facebook.com/thenerdparty. Reach out to the show through the network Twitter account at Join Nerd Party or on Instagram at the Nerd Party using the hashtag GreatShotKid and let us know your own thoughts about what images from these films you would use if somebody asked you, what can I expect? What images you would show them as with a fair expectation. So with all of that out of the way, Mike, I think the first question to ask is, to set the mindset, is what is a word you would use to describe the aesthetic of the original Star Wars trilogy? If you had to be pinned down to one word, maybe a few words, one word might be too much, but one word or a sentence for the aesthetic.
Lived in sci-fi.
Lived in sci-fi.
The idea that this is a futuristic world with futuristic tech where everything is much more advanced than what we're used to here on Earth, but with that realistic portrayal of, it's new to us, but it's not new to them. And, even though we may have iPhones, that doesn't mean the screens aren't going to be cracked. You know what I mean?
I do. I like that. I think that very much speaks to the Star Wars aesthetic. Absolutely. Especially in the original trilogy, is that sense of a lived-in feel. For me, if I were to use a word or a phrase, it would be documentary fiction. Yeah. And I think that ties into the lived-in sci-fi thing, because the strength of these films is the approach has always been, I'm telling you a fantastical story, but I'm going to present it as if it's reality.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to dress it up and trick you with Dutch angles and anything too far off the wall. It's going to feel like you're the proverbial fly on the wall witnessing real events. That's I think we're in the same ballpark there. So with that in mind, that of course would bring us to our first shot from the original Star Wars. If you were to pick a shot, and you can feel free to talk about process, what your thinking was getting there and stuff like that. What is the shot that you would put down on a table if somebody said, I've never seen Star Wars, what can I expect? And you say, this shot right here, this is what you can expect.
Yeah, this exercise is really hard, and I'm not exactly sure that I did a good job on any of these, to be honest, because my initial thought was well, what is it? I mean, in a lot of ways, I think the perfect shot would be Luke sitting at the bar in the cantina, because it's
sure.
but at the same time, I guess I kind of felt like I needed to go more for the iconic shots in order to give a better idea of what, not just what was a typical shot, but what was sort of what I think of when I think of the Star Wars aesthetic. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So what I ended up going with was the shot of Luke at the homestead looking at the two sons.
Easily one of the most iconic shots in film history. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's iconic, but also, I mean, the thing about it, which is striking, I think, and which makes it stand out and makes it Star Wars, is it's showing that this is an alien world where there's not one but two suns. But at the same time, it's an alien world where, there's technology in the background. There's like a moisture evaporator, which is this piece of equipment which we don't have on Earth. And then there's, like a clay hut and like a guy, dressed in, tattered clothes, essentially, who's just like a working class kid who's dreaming of that thing, which is the same thing that we're dreaming about, really, by watching the movie, going to a better world, going to, something which will blow their mind. And so I guess that to me sums up Star Wars more than anything.
I think it's a completely valid choice. I mean, there's a reason that everybody continually gravitates to that scene, to that image of, and the thing is, I think that what you just highlighted speaks to the whole lived-in universe, and I think also speaks to the documentary fiction of these are two suns, but he's doing something that anybody on a planet that we know, Earth, would do, looking off into the sunset. It contextualizes everything alien to us in that picture as the way we would consider our own technology. It's just there. So no, I mean, it's a completely valid choice. It was definitely in contention for me, and I was very much leaning toward it because it does speak to the spirit of the film. But then I remembered that as a kid, a shot that I absolutely fixated on, that was in a lot of storybooks and press materials and those sorts of things, was actually the shot of Obi-Wan and Vader, sabers crossed, facing off against each other. There's that still shot. And of course, in all of the supplementary materials that they sold to kids, the sabers didn't look like they did in the movies. They were always, the hand painted in. And I think that really speaks to it, because you have this whole sense of good wizard, bad wizard, laser sword, technology. Like it's this obvious collision of all of these crazy ideas coming together. And I remember it captivating me as a kid and looking at it and saying, there's something familiar about it. There's a sword fight going on, and there are these soldiers there, but it's different than what I'm expecting. It's not Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But then there's also another shot that was in contention, and it's the final shot of them looking out with their medals on, at, smiling, beaming out, to the world, that classic sort of group shot at the end of togetherness and love and family. But I'd have to say, I have to go to the shot of Ben and Vader with their sabers crossed. That's just because I think it speaks to, this is a familiar type of story, but it's an environment you're not expecting.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. Two larger-than-life figures, one very mechanical, one very, spiritual, facing off in a, spaceship for all practical purposes. That definitely works in a lot of ways. But I definitely do see the other shots that you're talking about as well. I mean, there's so many shots throughout the movie that it's impossible to sort of like pick just one. And I think the fact that, like you're saying, you saw it in all of the marketing material and everything like that, all of the books and stuff, really sort of speaks to the idea that in a lot of ways the Star Wars aesthetic travels beyond the movies and sort of has become part of the larger culture. And because of that, it's hard to sort of narrow your focus back down to the movies for an exercise like this.
Yeah, it is. It's because when we were discussing this, it seemed like it was going to be a lot easier. I'll pick this shot, and just going through the screen caps and oh, that's really good. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's iconic. So yeah. All right. So we've got Star Wars, sunset, laser sword fight. We get to Empire Strikes Back. We have a different cinematographer. We have a different director. But it's still part of the Star Wars aesthetic. What do you wind up choosing? How does it stitch together? How does it tie into what came, what you chose before? And why did you choose this one?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, Empire to me represents sort of like an expansion of everything that was done on Star Wars. I do still firmly believe that the only reason why Star Wars is as massively successful and popular as it is today is because of Empire. I mean, I think that it would still be considered, a masterpiece, if it were just Star Wars. But I don't think it would be the cultural phenomenon that it is now without Empire. And because of that, I wanted to pick a shot which sort of represented an uptick in quality from it on sort of a visual level.
Sure.
But one that also sort of captured, the other elements which made Empire so much better than Star Wars, in my humble opinion, which are things like the greater character development and the strengthened relationships and the ominous nature of the story in general, the idea that, the bad guys win. And so I picked a shot from the carbon freezing scene in which Han and Leia are looking at each other standing on opposite sides of the frame, and in the background, out of focus, is Darth Vader and Boba Fett, who are having the conversation that we hear, talking about sort of trivial procedural matters regarding what to do, if Han Solo dies. And, what we're focusing on as viewers is the relationship between Han and Leia and how they, just sort of discover this, and it's all about to come crashing down. So that, and the fact that it is on a set with some of the best lighting in the history of cinema.
Agreed.
That was really important to me as well. So that was the shot that I picked.
Okay, I think that's a very, very valid choice. I really do. With Empire, I wound up initially gravitating toward a lot of the dual images. Vader and Luke again in the carbon freezing chamber, and Luke, and one sequence and that I'm obsessed with visually very much is after Luke. It starts with Luke stepping into the tunnel that lights up, the long tunnel and coming down. But then when he's in there and he's lit from below and everything's red and in shadow, and he turns around after hearing Vader igniting his saber, and you can see this hallway off to the left, and it's an afterthought because Vader walks into frame almost immediately afterward. But it's this sense of, you see how small Luke is in this big world, how out of place he is, how lost he is in this technological underbelly. But as obsessed as I am with that, I think, again, I'm influenced by stuff that I saw in a lot of materials growing up, and it's in specific a shot of Yoda, R2, and Luke on Dagobah, because I think that, again, speaks to the aesthetic. I think that's a beautifully lit scene because it's a completely convincing set. It's supposed to be an outdoor swamp, and it looks like an outdoor swamp, even though it's an indoor contrivance. And I think it speaks again to the idea that we're going to sell you the fantastic, this idea of a puppet, and then a robot, and a dude. And this is real, and this is happening. And so for that's the one that pops to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very good one for sure. You could say that, since Luke is sort of the heart of the story and everything, and this is, the next step in his evolution and all that stuff, that it's almost necessary to include something like that in the shot. So yeah, I could definitely see that.
Cool. All right, so we come to my favorite of the series, Return of the Jedi. Where do you end? Where do you end up?
Yeah, this one was really hard because, like, the things that I consider to be like thematically important to the movie are not necessarily my favorite parts of the movie, and there's a lot of stuff that you could do with Luke and Vader at the end, and the shot that I ended up picking was, I think, thematically very important to the movie, although it may not be my favorite shot, but it is a very striking shot, and it's also a shot which I always remember because it was the last shot before a side break on, I think, pretty much every Laserdisc that was released, and that is the shot where Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker first begin their lightsaber duel, and the lightsabers cross right in front of a close-up of the Emperor who's laughing. And that, to me, I don't know, it says a lot, because for one thing, it's like, yes, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker are going to have their final battle, but the person who's winning, no matter who wins, the person who really wins is the Emperor, and he's the one who's really excited about this because he knows the score. And also seeing his excitement and seeing his pleasure in this suggests that maybe Darth Vader himself is not the evil person that we have come to know him to be, but in fact just sort of a victim in this larger game, So
I like that. I mean, it's a beautiful shot. I think it's a great choice. I know the specific shot you're talking about, of course. I think everybody does, and I think that it is an important enough shot, and I think it's a telling enough shot that that one time, I think it was on the DVD where they got the color saturations wrong. That's why everybody had a problem with that.
Yeah,
was the shot was messed up, and it was no, fix it. Yeah, that's a really strong choice. That is probably a better choice than the one I wound up with, which one of the shots that I've always been obsessed with is it's when Jabba the Hutt says Gusliak not, and the subtitle says bring her to me.
Mm-hmm.
That shot for some reason has always fascinated me. And I've tried to figure out why repeatedly. And I think it gets back to the idea of here's a giant puppet, a guy in makeup, and a guy in a robot costume. But there's nothing special about the shot necessarily. It's just the way it's framed. If you stop and you really look at it, you realize the absurdity of what you're watching, but it sells it to you. So that pops for me. But then... oh, man, see, I keep coming back to your choice because I think it's a really great choice. But the one I wound up with, after toying with the idea of having the one of the, them walking out and seeing the ATST and all of the troops out in front before the Ewoks attack, I realized the reason I was gravitating toward that one, and I wound up choosing the very iconic shot of the Falcon flying through the swarm of fighters with a Death Star in the background and everything like that. Is I think that the sequence goes along where you can see scale so that you can understand as you go through that there's this very basic simplicity to Star Wars, and then it gets more complex and a little murkier, and then you have this explosion of scale in Jedi. And I think that's probably why I chose that shot, is suddenly everything has just built, and you get the sense of everything building until you look at this one picture and you say, look at everything that is going on in here. And it's just overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a great shot. And one of the things which I kept on thinking about was like whether or not I could use something from that sequence, because that's by far my favorite sequence in the movie. And those shots, I think, just as shots, are better than the one that I chose. And if we were talking about just favorite shots from particular movies, I probably would have gone with something like that, for sure.
Yeah, it's tough, too, because the thing is, does that mean that I'm picking, the head of model photography as, but just, I guess maybe in a certain sense, yeah.
Sometimes that's what it is,
Yeah, so those are our shots. Those are our great shots, kid. We would be very interested to know, what you guys think. So go ahead and reach out to us on nerdparty.com/contact and let us know. So we will be posting a link to our favorite shots so that everybody can see them, when the show releases. So be on the lookout for those. So that brings us to Chapter 2 of Splinter of the Mind's Eye, Mike, which furthers the story. If everybody remembers from last week in Chapter 1, Luke and Leia are flying along on a special mission. Leia's in a Y-Wing that has 2 seats because 3PO's in it. R2 is with Luke. She has engine trouble. Long story short, they wind up crash landing on Minbin, Sercarpus 5 in the system, and Luke sets out to find Leia. So that brings us to Chapter 2. Mike, what happens in Chapter 2?
Well, in Chapter 2, Luke seems to find Leia a lot quicker than he initially thought he would, which was, lucky on his part, I guess. I don't know. And,
yes.
And the two of them decide to continue their trek to find something, civilization of some sort, so that they can, get some transport or whatever and get off to their rendezvous. So they begin their search, and in their search, after a couple days, I guess, they come across a building of some sort of metal structure, which is home to some stormtroopers. And now they have to, ditch their rebel gear in order to sort of blend in and maybe find out what happens next.
Yeah, they find out there's a mining colony there, and they ditch their clothes. There's an interesting ethical moral moment where Luke says they're going to have to steal some miners' clothing so that they can blend in, and Leia balks at that, and Luke basically says, "Don't worry, I'll be the one to steal it." And then she's okay with it. And it's one of those things where that's sort of a moral question. You're still responsible for the stealing if you're it's one of those things where it seems to murky up some of the clear morals we're used to getting with Star Wars.
Yeah, I think that's kind of weird. I really don't think that she would have a big problem with it. I think she realizes, what is involved with war and, stealing some clothes from some locals in order to try to, prevent, the Empire from taking over your planet. You got to weigh the good with the bad, and stealing a few jumpsuits is pretty low on the list of immoral acts, if you ask me.
Yes.
War atrocities or whatever. So, that was weird, but that does kind of speak to a larger thing which you see in this chapter, which is the idea of portraying Leia as a princess first and a soldier second. This is something which I don't think is present in the first movie, but certainly in the first movie, since she is on a diplomatic mission at the start and is basically scrambling after that, we don't get to see like warrior Leia like we do in the later episodes. And of course, I think starting with Empire, it becomes absolutely clear that Leia would have absolutely no problem, running around in the dirt, rolling around in the dirt, in order to further her cause, and she's not the sort of uptight princess in the stereotypical sense that she's portrayed to be in this chapter.
Yeah, and there's you try to think of it in terms of, here we are, several decades later, and I can only imagine the way this would have been written now would have been very different, because this chapter opens with Leia deciding to sit still and wait for Luke to come and save her. And I think that would not have been written that way in the modern era.
Yeah.
But it's not just saying that she is, and I think you point to it appropriately, she's not treated as quote-unquote helpless because she's female. She's treated as, to use your term, princess first, soldier second. So she's a princess, and so she's prim and proper. Luke even says when they get their disguises on, you're walking like a princess, slouch, stagger a little bit. Don't walk regally like you're a member of the imperial household. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to it, that he's not treating her in this way because she's female. He's treating her in this way because she's royalty. And I think that was dropped very quickly with Empire.
Yeah.
Because, yes, she's Princess Leia, but then by the time we get to Empire, she's not in the the white dress anymore, and she's not damsel in distress. She's picking up a gun and she's running the rebellion. Mm-hmm. There's a very different sense of Leia in Empire than there was in this book.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's a lot of walking. We now have 2 chapters under our belt. What do you think of Alan Dean Foster's writing style by this point?
I think it's good. I mean, comparing it to a lot of the books that I've read recently in the Star Wars expanded universe, or whatever you want to call it, I think that maybe it's because he's a good writer, or maybe it's because he was not bogged down by decades of fandom and whatever. But it actually reads much more like English than lots of those books, because there aren't a bunch of made-up things that they're doing all the time. So, I mean, it's kind of the Star Wars equivalent of technobabble, even though it's not technobabble. It's just so much world building, treated as just everyday stuff that, I guess trying to capture what Lucas did with that aesthetic that we talked about earlier in this episode, but it does not play the same on the page. In fact, this, I think, does a much better job of portraying this world as a reality, because they're talking about things which we can relate to as people.
I agree with you. The thing that jumped out at me more in this chapter than the first chapter is that Foster uses vocabulary that you're not used to getting in modern extended fiction. Which is not to say that it's bad in the modern fiction, but that he is writing with a more adult tone toward a different audience. The books that come out now are very well written by and large, but they're very much written with a broader audience in mind, so that if a 10-year-old picks it up or a 40-year-old picks it up, everybody's going to have essentially the same experience. Whereas if I gave this book to my 10-year-old, who is a voracious reader, there are words in this where she would stop and she would say, "What does this mean?" And I'd have to define it for her, because that's just the type of vocabulary that he uses. And I think that's just interesting in and of itself, because he doesn't slow down for any reason. He's just writing in Alan Dean Foster style for this.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So we hope you're joining along with us. We're only 2 chapters in, so there's still time for you to pick up your copy of Alan Dean Foster's Splinter of the Mind's Eye at your local library, so you can read along. Come in and join us next week for Chapter 3, and where we will also pick a shot from each of the prequel trilogy films to extend our experiment about the Star Wars aesthetic. In the meantime, Mike, where can people reach you on the internet?
Well, you can find me on commentarytrackstars.com doing a show called Commentary Trackstars, and you can also find me on Trek.fm doing a show called The Edge, and another show called Stage 9 along with you, and then you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K.
Yes, and you can find me on Twitter at Kessel Junkie, and I am co-hosting Stage 9 with Mike over on Trek FM, which is like this show, but for Star Trek creators. And you can find me back here on the Nerd Party Network co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matthew Rushing, and I'm out there co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. So we look forward to seeing you next week on Great Shot Kid.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.